Rain hammered the taxi roof that October night in Chicago. A stranger slid in beside me, soaked and breathless. She smelled like rain and something warm, familiar somehow. Our eyes met in the rearview mirror, and I forgot my stop. "You're staring," she whispered, smiling like she already knew me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart wouldn't let me. That night changed everything I thought I wanted from life. My name is Mia Turner, 29. A paralegal at a downtown Chicago law firm, engaged to a man my family adored, living a life that wasn't fully mine. That rainy November night, a stranger named Elena Cross climbed into my cab share and unknowingly began unraveling everything I had spent years carefully building around myself. The cab was crawling through Michigan Avenue traffic when the driver pulled over for a second fare, and Elena climbed in shaking rain from her dark curls. She apologized for intruding, said her own ride had canceled, and asked if I minded sharing the last few blocks toward the loop. I told her I didn't mind, though my pulse was already doing something strange, something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. She introduced herself as a singer at a jazz club called the Blue Room, said she just finished a set and still smelled like stage lights. I told her my name, my job, the boring facts people used to fill silence, and she listened like every word actually mattered. When the cab stopped at my building, she handed me a card with the club's address, said, "Come hear me sing sometime," and vanished into rain. I told myself I would never go. That engaged women didn't chase strangers who sang jazz on rainy Tuesday nights downtown. I kept the card in my coat pocket for 3 weeks, touching its edges during boring depositions, telling no one it existed. My fiancé Daniel noticed nothing, too busy planning our wedding registry and our family's approval, the life we were both quietly performing. One Friday, restless and unable to sleep, I told Daniel I was working late and drove instead to the Blue Room, heart pounding the entire way. Elena stood under a single spotlight, voice low and aching, and when she saw me at the bar, she smiled without missing a note. After her set, she sat beside me, ordered 2 coffees instead of drinks, and said, "I hoped that card would work eventually." We talked until closing about music, about Chicago, about the families we both tried too hard to please, and I forgot to check my phone. Walking to my car, she said something that stayed with me for weeks. "You laugh like someone who hasn't laughed freely in a long time." I didn't correct her, because she was right, and I hated how easily she had seen straight through me. I started finding reasons to pass by the Blue Room, telling myself it was coincidence, that I simply liked the neighborhood's coffee shop nearby. Elena never pushed, never asked about the ring on my finger, just kept offering easy conversation like a door left quietly open. One night she mentioned a man picking her up after her set, and something ugly and unfamiliar twisted painfully in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, that I had no right to feel anything, that I was engaged and this was simply friendship. Weeks passed in stolen coffee breaks and late texts I deleted before Daniel could see them. Small secrets I couldn't fully explain to myself. Elena asked once, gently, if I was happy with my life, and I laughed too quickly, too defensively, and changed the subject. She let it go. But her eyes lingered a second longer than necessary, like she was memorizing something she wasn't sure she'd keep. At a work charity gala that spring, I froze when Elena walked in wearing green silk, laughing with the event's photographer near the entrance. She caught my stare and crossed the room, and I realized with a jolt we had actually met once before. Years earlier. At my college roommate's birthday party. "You don't remember," she said softly, amused. "But I remembered your laugh the second you got into that cab." Something in me cracked open at that. The strange feeling that fate had been quietly rearranging pieces long before I noticed. Daniel found us talking near the dessert table and introduced himself, oblivious, shaking Elena's hand while my stomach twisted with guilt I couldn't name. That night, lying beside Daniel, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself honestly, for the first time, what exactly I was afraid of. The man Elena mentioned earlier turned out, weeks later, to be her younger brother Sam, visiting from Michigan. Not a boyfriend at all. I felt embarrassed by my relief, by how much lighter my chest suddenly felt, by a jealousy I had no business having. Elena laughed when I admitted my mistake, said, "Were you jealous?" Mia Turner. And I couldn't find a single honest word to answer with. Instead I changed the subject. But she remembered that moment, brought it up again weeks later with a knowing, gentle smile. My mother called constantly about wedding invitations, seating charts, dress fittings, filling my calendar with a future I was quietly starting to doubt. I began canceling plans with Daniel to catch Elena's Thursday sets, telling myself each time it would be the last one. One evening after closing, Elena walked me to my car and hesitated at the door. Rain starting again. Softer this time. Almost gentle. "I like you," she said plainly. "No games. No hedging. I think you already know that. And I think it scares you." I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Until she reached up and brushed rain from my cheek, her hand warm against November cold. "I'm engaged," I whispered, the words feeling foreign, like a script I'd memorized but no longer believed. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to leave him tonight. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself." She stepped back, gave me space to breathe, and walked into the rain without looking back, leaving me shaking in my own driveway. I sat in my car for an hour, engine off, replaying every moment since that first taxi ride, finally admitting what I'd known for months. I loved her. Not the safe, comfortable way I loved Daniel, but the terrifying, electric way people write songs about. That knowledge sat in my chest for days like a stone, heavy and undeniable, impossible to unknow once truly acknowledged. I avoided the blue room for 2 weeks, terrified of what I'd say, what I'd feel, what I might finally admit out loud. Elena texted once, simply, "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." And I read it 100 times before deleting it out of fear. Daniel proposed we move up the wedding date, citing his parents' schedules, and I smiled and agreed while something inside me quietly screamed. That night I dreamed of jazz music and rain, woke up crying, and couldn't explain to Daniel why I felt so unbearably sad. I finally returned to the club on a Tuesday, sat through her entire set, and waited until the room emptied before approaching the stage. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, voice shaking. "I don't know how to be who I actually am." Elena took my hand gently, said, "You don't have to know yet. You just have to stop pretending you don't feel it." That night, for the first time, I let myself kiss her, standing in an empty jazz club at midnight, terrified and finally, truly awake. Guilt and joy tangled together inside me on the drive home. 2 feelings I hadn't realized could coexist so violently. I broke off the engagement 3 days later, telling Daniel only that I needed time, unable yet to explain the deeper truth. He was confused, hurt, asked repeatedly what had changed, and I gave him half-truths because I hadn't found the courage for whole ones. My mother called crying, said I was throwing away a good man, a good future, everything our family had worked toward for years. I didn't tell her about Elena. Not yet. Not while the wound with Daniel was still so fresh and raw between us. Elena and I moved slowly, carefully, meeting mostly at her apartment above a bakery in Wicker Park, away from prying eyes and questions. She never pressured me to come out faster than I could handle, understood instinctively how much I still had left to lose. For a few precious months, our relationship existed in a careful bubble, just us, jazz records, and Sunday mornings that felt like stolen gifts. I started smiling more at work, and my colleague Priya noticed, teasing gently that I finally looked like a person actually living her life. I didn't correct her guesses, Just let the mystery sit there. Unspoken but visible in every unguarded moment I couldn't quite hide. Daniel eventually found out through mutual friends that I'd been seen frequently at the Blue Room, and his confusion curdled slowly into suspicion. He called me one night, voice cold, asking directly if there was someone else, and I finally, quietly, told him the truth. "It's not another man," I said. "It's a woman. Her name is Elena, and I love her more than I ever loved you." Silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, until he finally said, "I need time to process that," and hung up. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my apartment, not angry exactly, but wounded in a way I hadn't expected or prepared for. "Was any of it real?" he asked, and I told him honestly that I had loved him, just never the way I loved her. He left without another word, and I sat on my kitchen floor crying, grieving a version of my life I was choosing to release. My mother's reaction, when I finally told her, was worse than I imagined. Silence followed by a single devastating question. What will people say? My father barely spoke to me for weeks, and my younger brother Josh became the reluctant messenger between two people no longer speaking directly. Elena held me through those nights, never once suggesting I should have kept quiet, never once making me feel my truth was a burden. "Family takes time," she said softly. "Mind it too." My father didn't speak to me for 2 full years after I came out. That confession surprised me, and for the first time she told me her own story. The years of silence before her family finally softened. Knowing she'd survived something similar gave me a strange, steady kind of hope I desperately needed during those raw, uncertain months. At work, rumors began circulating quietly. Started, I later learned, by Daniel's cousin who worked in our firm's mailroom downstairs. Whispers followed me through hallways, and I noticed senior partners' greetings growing shorter, colder, more carefully measured than before. Priya warned me privately that the firm's culture wasn't as progressive as its marketing suggested, especially among the older partners upstairs. I brushed off her warning, naively believing my work performance would matter more than my personal life to people who barely knew me. Elena's own career was accelerating meanwhile, her voice earning attention from a small independent record label scouting Chicago's jazz scene. She seemed lit from within during those weeks, rehearsing new songs, some clearly, secretly, written about me and our stolen mornings together. I loved watching her chase that dream, though a small, selfish part of me quietly feared what success might eventually take from us. One evening, the label's producer mentioned a possible opportunity in New York, and Elena's excitement was immediate, genuine, and impossible to hide. I smiled and told her I was happy for her, even as something cold settled quietly in the pit of my stomach. We didn't discuss it further that night, both of us avoiding the obvious question hanging unspoken in the air between us. Daniel, meanwhile, had grown bitter, and one afternoon he cornered me in the firm's parking garage, voice sharp with old wounds. "You humiliated me," he said. "Everyone at the club knows now." My mother had to explain to her whole church group. I told him I was sorry for his pain but refused to apologize for finally living honestly, and he stormed off furious. A week later, managing partner Whitfield's assistant scheduled an unexpected meeting for me, vague on details, urgent in tone. I walked into that meeting terrified, certain somehow that Daniel's anger had finally found a way to reach my career directly. Whitfield's office was quiet, formal, and she gestured for me to sit, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. "There have been comments," she said carefully, "about your personal life affecting client relationships. I need you to explain the situation." My hands shook, but I told her the truth plainly. I had ended an engagement because I was in love with a woman. She was silent for a long moment, studying me, and I braced myself for the worst outcome I could imagine. Then she said something I never expected. It took me until I was 45 to say something similar out loud to my own family. I stared at her. Done. As she quietly explained her longtime partner Rachel. A fact she'd kept carefully separate from firm life for decades. This firm has a policy, she continued. And it protects you. I won't let quiet gossip decide your future here. Relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly cried right there in her office, unable to fully believe what I just heard. She promised to address the source of the rumors directly and firmly. And true to her word, the whispers slowly began to fade. Daniel's cousin was quietly reassigned to another department, and the office atmosphere around me gradually returned to something like normal. I told Elena everything that night, and she laughed with relief, said, "See? The universe has strange ways of protecting people." But the New York opportunity still hovered unresolved between us, a conversation we kept circling without ever quite landing on. One night I finally asked her directly if she was considering the move, and her hesitation before answering told me everything. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's a real chance. Mia. The kind that might not come around again for years." I told her, honestly, that she should take it if it was right for her, even as the words tasted like ash. "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't pretend you don't care. I need to know what you actually want, not what you think I want to hear," I admitted, voice breaking. That the thought of her leaving terrified me more than anything had in years, including my own family's rejection. We didn't resolve it that night, both of us retreating into careful silence, the unspoken fear of loss sitting heavy between us. My mother, unexpectedly, called the next morning, her voice softer than it had been in months, asking if we could talk. I drove to my parents' house braced for another difficult conversation, but instead found my mother waiting with old photo albums spread across the table. "I found something," she said quietly, pulling out a folded page from my childhood diary I hadn't seen in 15 years. In it, 13-year-old me had written about a girl in my class, feelings I hadn't understood yet, feelings I'd buried deep afterward. "I found this years ago," my mother admitted, tears in her eyes. I told myself it was just a phase. I was scared, so I said nothing. She confessed she had suspected the truth long before I found the courage to say it, and her silence had been fear, not judgment. "I don't want to lose you over my own fear," she said. "I want to meet her. I want to know Elena." I cried harder than I had in months, relief in years of unspoken hurt finally breaking loose all at once between us. That reconciliation gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed, a steadier ground beneath a relationship still facing its own uncertain future. I went to Elena that same evening and told her everything, including my fear that I was somehow holding her back from her dreams. "You're not holding me back," she said firmly. "But I can't keep chasing a life if I don't know you're chasing it with me." We sat with that honestly for the first time, finally naming the fear neither of us had been brave enough to speak aloud. The record label's decision deadline arrived faster than either of us expected, forcing the conversation we'd been carefully avoiding for weeks. Elena asked me directly, "If I stay in Chicago, will you still be here in 5 years?" Fully, without hiding anymore. I told her yes, without hesitation, that I was done living carefully, done building a life around other people's comfort instead of mine. But she still hadn't given me her own answer, and the uncertainty sat between us like a held breath neither could release. 2 nights later, Daniel resurfaced unexpectedly, showing up at the Blue Room during Elena's set, clearly having had too much to drink. He confronted her at the bar afterward, voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear, calling her cruel things I won't repeat here. I stepped between them, furious and shaking, telling him firmly he had no right to speak to her that way, ever. Security escorted him out, and Elena, visibly shaken, gripped my hand tightly, more grateful than angry in that raw moment. 1:37. "I've never had someone stand up for me like that," she whispered later. And something between us shifted permanently that night. The incident, unfortunately, reached the law firm through Daniel's own bitter retelling, painting me as the villain of his humiliation. Whitfield called me in again, this time simply to check on me, not to reprimand. Genuine concern replacing earlier formality entirely. "You don't owe this place your silence anymore," she told me. "You've already proven who you are here. Let the gossip die on its own." Her support steadied me through a week of renewed whispers, and slowly, predictably, the office chatter faded once again into background noise. Elena, meanwhile, grew quieter, distracted, and I sensed the New York decision weighing heavier on her than she was letting on. One evening she came to my apartment holding a folded letter, hands trembling slightly, and asked me to sit down with her. "I already called them back," she said. "3 days ago. I turned it down before I even asked you to stay." I stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" asked. My voice caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Because I needed to know I chose this for myself," she said. "Not because you asked me to, but because I wanted it." She explained she'd found a smaller label right in Chicago, one interested in her original songs, closer to home, closer to everything she loved. Relief and love collided so powerfully in my chest that I couldn't speak. Just pulled her into the tightest embrace I'd ever given anyone. "I chose you," she said simply. "But more than that, I chose the life we're building. And that life is here." We sat together that night, quiet and unhurried, finally certain of something neither of us had dared name out loud before. A month later, my mother invited Elena to Sunday dinner, the first real test of the fragile peace our family was slowly rebuilding. My father was stiff and quiet at first, but Elena's easy warmth slowly softened him, especially once she mentioned loving his old jazz records. By dessert, he was pulling out his own vinyl collection, and for the first time in months, our house felt like it used to. "Jack," my brother whispered to me in the kitchen that Elena was way cooler than Daniel had ever been, and I laughed until I cried. Driving home that night, Elena squeezed my hand and said, "I think that went better than either of us hoped it would." I agreed, marveling at how quickly fear could dissolve once people were finally given the chance to see the truth clearly. At work, Whitfield quietly nominated me for a promotion to senior paralegal, citing my composure through a difficult personal season as proof of character. I accepted, humbled, aware of how differently this story could have ended without one person willing to stand firmly in my corner. Daniel eventually moved away from Chicago entirely, taking a transfer to his firm's Denver office, and our paths stopped crossing altogether. I heard through mutual friends that he'd started dating again, and I found I could genuinely wish him well without any lingering guilt. Elena's new songs began gaining attention locally, several explicitly inspired by Taxis, Rain, and the strange, quiet start of Unexpected Love. She performed one titled Wrong Stop, and I sat in the front row, crying happily, recognizing every single line as our own story. After the show, a woman approached us, introducing herself as a producer scouting talent for a small Chicago documentary about local artists. She asked if we'd be willing to share our story, on camera, as part of a piece about love and courage in modern America. I hesitated, old fears resurfacing briefly, but Elena squeezed my hand and said, "Only if you're ready. No pressure either way." After a week of thinking it over, I said yes, realizing hiding no longer served any purpose in the life I now had. Filming that documentary segment felt strange at first, then strangely freeing, speaking our story aloud to strangers who simply nodded and listened. My mother agreed to be interviewed too, admitting on camera her early fear and eventual regret for the silence she'd kept for years. Watching the rough cut together, I realized how far we'd all traveled, from that single hesitant question in her kitchen to this. Elena and I moved into a small apartment together that spring, near the same neighborhood where the Blue Room still hosted her Thursday sets. Unpacking boxes, I found the old business card she'd given me that first rainy night, still slightly warped from the water. I framed it, small and simple, and hung it by our front door. A quiet reminder of exactly where this all began. My mother started attending Elena's shows regularly, sometimes bringing her book club friends, proudly introducing Elena as my daughter's partner without hesitation. The transformation still occasionally caught me off guard. This woman who once feared gossip now defending our relationship publicly and fiercely. That the firm. Whitfield mentioned quietly one afternoon that our documentary segment had aired locally, and several younger associates had reached out grateful. One junior associate admitted privately she'd been struggling with her own coming out, and our story had given her unexpected courage to speak. I realized then how much visibility mattered. How quiet, unremarkable Tuesday nights could ripple outward into other people's private battles too. Elena's small label released her first full record that autumn, titled simply Rainy Stops, dedicated openly to me on the liner notes. At the release party, surrounded by our families, friends, and colleagues, I barely recognized the frightened woman I'd been just a year earlier. Whitfield attended too, bringing her partner Rachel, and the two of them danced together freely, something Whitfield admitted she'd never done publicly before. "You gave me courage too," she told me quietly that night. "Watching you choose honesty reminded me I still had more choosing to do." I hadn't realized my own small act of bravery had rippled outward that far, touching lives I hadn't even known were watching closely. Late in the evening, Elena pulled me onto the small dance floor, humming the melody of Wrong Stop softly against my ear. "Any regrets?" she asked, only half joking. And I shook my head, certain in a way I'd never been certain of anything before. "My only regret," I told her, "is not getting in that cab sooner, and making you wait even those few extra minutes." She laughed, the sound warm and familiar now, nothing like the nervous stranger who'd once slid into my rain-soaked cab seat. We stood together that night, surrounded by people who had once been strangers, then obstacles, and were now, somehow, our chosen family. My father raised a quiet toast later, awkward but sincere, welcoming Elena officially, finally. Without hesitation or careful, measured words, I caught my mother crying happily near the bar, and for once, the tears held nothing but relief and genuine pride. Winter arrived, and Elena proposed on the same rainy street corner where our cab had once idled that very first November night. She had no ring yet, just a small handwritten note reading, "Will you keep getting into taxis with me? Always?" I laughed through tears, said yes immediately, and the rain that night felt less like an obstacle and more like an old friend. We planned a small wedding for the following spring, choosing the Blue Room as our venue, full circle from where everything quietly began. Daniel, unexpectedly, sent a short, gracious message wishing us well, a final closing of a chapter neither of us needed anymore. My mother helped plan the seating chart this time with genuine excitement, no longer performing approval but truly, finally, feeling it. The morning of our wedding, I found the old taxi business card still framed by our door and slipped it into my pocket for luck. Elena walked toward me down a short aisle strung with fairy lights, humming softly, and I forgot, once again, every worry I'd carried. Whitfield officiated, having gotten ordained specifically for the occasion, joking that firm policy now officially covered weddings too. We exchanged vows built entirely around rain, taxis, and second chances, promising always to choose honesty over comfortable silence going forward. Looking out at family, chosen and given, I understood finally that courage isn't the absence of fear, but choosing love despite it. Elena leaned close after our first dance and whispered, "Still glad you shared that cab with a stranger?" I looked at everyone who loved us openly now, and answered simply, "Best wrong stop I ever made in my whole life." Some nights, we still take taxis just to remember. Watching city lights blur through rain-streaked windows, grateful for where one ride led us. We built a life from a single rainy detour. Proof that sometimes the most ordinary night quietly holds your entire future inside it. Van D.